afternoon. Welcome to Views on News. I'm Javed Tehami. Pakistan has been wreaked with the devastation of the recent floods, and its impact has been huge. And there was an initial estimate by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who was here a couple of days back on a solidarity visit to Pakistan, and he went to visit the flood-affected areas, particularly in Balochistan as well as in Sindh. The initial estimate that was given by the Secretary General was around $30 billion. But now there is a little bit of change in that. There is another assessment which has been made by the Flood Response Coordination Center, and that has estimated around $40 billion of damages to Pakistan's economy because of these massive floods. Now, there were certain statements by UN Secretary General as well that Pakistan is paying the price for the wrongdoing of industrialized nations, and it is not the matter of generosity, but it is actually the matter of justice that these industrialized nations actually owe to the countries like Pakistan, which are facing the brunt of the climatic changes that are happening and causing havoc to the economies and the livelihoods of the masses of a certain country. Pakistan being very low with the carbon emissions, that constitute only 1% of the total carbon emissions worldwide, but Pakistan has faced the brunt in the form of these massive floods because of the incessant monsoon downpours. This time around 3 to 4 times at certain places and 8 times at certain other places the monsoon downpours were recorded. However, Pakistani authorities are braced completely, and the government is leading from the front in order to provide relief and the rescue to the masses who've been directly hit by these massive floods. The gravity of the situation is very much the center of the attention, not only for the Pakistani authorities, for the international community as well. Every responsible citizen of Pakistan is trying their best to come to the fore to help the flood-affected people out, and Pakistani armed forces, including Pakistan Army, the Navy and the Pakistan Air Force, are relentlessly busy in providing relief to the flood-affected people in form of launching sorties to evacuate the stranded people in the flood-hit areas, as well as establishing the medical centers, and they're also providing ration and the cooked food packs and the medical services to the affected population as well. International community not only has pledged the amount for these relief activities and the rehabilitation of the flood-affected people in Pakistan, but also we have seen over the last couple of weeks many humanitarian aid flights, particularly from the Muslim brotherly countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Qatar. Now Saudi Arabia has also launched a benevolent campaign in order to muster that kind of an amount which could be utilized for averting the miseries of the flood-affected people as well. There's lots more to be discussed regarding this. Let's watch this particular report first, and then we'll talk to our panelists who are present with us in the studio.
All the concerned institutions of Pakistan, under the leadership of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, are tirelessly engaged in providing relief to the flood affectees and trying their best that this humanitarian crisis don't exceed in its intensity due to the cumulative post-disaster challenges. In this regard, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in a meeting of Federal Cabinet in Islamabad, has urged all stakeholders to actively engage in ongoing relief and rehabilitation efforts in the flood-affected areas of the country. On the other hand, on the special directions of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, restoration of road and power infrastructure in the flood-affected areas is continuing on emergency basis, and reports are being presented to Prime Minister in this regard on daily basis, as he is personally monitoring the restoration work. On the other hand, as per the directives of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the government has launched the digital flood dashboard, which, with the use of latest technology, will provide all the relevant details about the relief activities and will ensure the transparency in the ongoing processes. The Prime Minister also said that the audit of the financial aid received for flood victims would be conducted by the AGPR and the world's reputed audit firm for the sake of transparency.
You just watched that report, and in that report, it was very clearly mentioned that a digital flashboard has also been launched by the government in order to disburse that amount, the aid which is being sent by the international community towards Pakistan, to disburse that in a transparent manner. Let's jump into the discussion and introduce our panelists for today's show. We are joined in the studio by Dr. Pervaiz Ameer, who is a flood expert. Thank you very much for being on the show, Dr. Ameer. And we are also joined by Dr. Asif Javed, who is environmental scientist. Thank you for your time also on the show. I'll begin the discussion with you, Dr. Ameer. When we talk about United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres' visit to Pakistan, it was really a kind gesture at a critical time that Pakistani nation and the government is actually faced with. And very categorically, he said it's not the wrongdoing of Pakistan for what it is actually paying the price for. And for the international community to come to the fore and help Pakistan out in this difficult time, it's not the matter of generosity. Actually, it is the matter of justice. What's your take on that?
I fully agree with that commentary by the Secretary General. And Pakistan is just a test case. This type of event will occur in other parts of South Asia. It could be India tomorrow, it could be Bangladesh, it could be other countries. It will occur in Europe, it will occur elsewhere. So we are really a test case to see how the world responds to a flood of this biblical proportions. You know, it's just overwhelming for Pakistan with 1/3 of its population just submerged under water. And I think it's also a point of concern that the world really needs to stop and rethink. A country like Pakistan, which is sometimes ranked 5th, sometimes 8th on the German Watch Vulnerability Index, you know, the first 4 or 5 countries are those countries which have a population. If you combine those Maldives, Samoas, the others, you combine them together, their population is less than the population of Karachi. So Pakistan is at the forefront. We are #1 facing this brunt of climate change. So I think that message is now very clear. Those who have not been able to record it from the writing on the wall, they can see it on the television and they can see what is happening within Pakistan right now. So I think it's very timely, this message. And yes, the world has to come up and Pakistan has to put forward a very transparent mechanism by which it can receive aid, it can disperse aid. We have some hiccups on that. You know, people have been saying that, I mean, there have been a bit lax on the money which was given in 2010. But this is much larger. We are talking $40 billion. My own feeling is it's going to be even larger than that. The reasons are simple. This flood is not over. Sir, this flood is not over. 15th September is officially the date which monsoon rains finish. This is not going to happen. We are already having rains right now. We are having, if you see Aptabad, the day before yesterday, what's going on in Aptabad, that's sort of the glaring point. And I think this will probably go on up to the end of September and maybe the first week of October. So please don't discount it that it's over, it's not over. So
Dr. Pervaiz very rightly put up, when there was an initial, still we are on the way in order to assess fully the scale and the proportion of the damage and the destruction which has been caused by these floods. The initial assessment by the Pakistani authorities was 10 billion, then went on to 12 billion. When United Nations Secretary General came to Pakistan, he had an assessment of 30 to 33 billion dollars. Now the flood Response Coordination Center has assessed that it could be around 40. So it definitely could increase to a much larger amount as well.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that it's not only the damage which this flood has caused, it is the loss of this valuable water which has gone into the sea. Add another 55 to 60 billion US dollars on that. That's the value of that water. So if you add that 60, 65 billion plus this 40, whatever that comes, you're talking about $100 billion ball game, you know. And part of it is our water management, but the other part, it's overwhelming. I mean, we are not at fault. Our CO2 emissions are, we are 135th on the world ranking for CO2 emissions, and we are also maybe less than 0.6% of the world total emissions. So how could you put us at fault? We are really not at fault.
We're not at fault. So, Dr. Pervaiz, what's your take on this, particularly when we talk about the assessment of the damages? Still, we are on the way to understand the exact proportion and the scale of this damage. So now the Flood Response Coordination Center has assessed it initially again, it's $40 billion.
Jawad, for me, it's like I totally agree to the Dr. Pervaiz Ameer. It is something like more than expected. Basically, $40 billion or $43 billion loss could be much more. Personally, I feel, because the flood is not over yet. We have water that is coming. If you look at the Sindh, which is on the downstream side of Indus Basin, so this flood is very important for the Sindh nowadays, because water from Himalayas, snow from Himalayas, from rivers, from the water from Balochistan Hill, all will converge into the Sindh, and ultimately it goes to the Arabian Sea. So we have to be more careful about the downstream nowadays, because rainfall is over, but it will come again, obviously, but water is still coming. We have lot of thousands and millions of streams that emerge in response to the rise in water table in Ahab Hill. So the water flow in the rivers, in the stream, they will continue and they will cause the damage. So the scale of damage is not yet $40 billion. I would say it's nothing. It could be more than $40 billion. And yes, we have been consistently discussing that we have been penalized, or we have been paying the cost for the wrongdoing of the West. So obviously, we deserve not aid. It is a kind of, as you mentioned, it's a kind of a justice that amount or something like in Paris Accord, $100 billion have been pledged for the developing countries.
So, Dr. Asif, this is a very pertinent point. Well, I'd like to discuss that one in detail with both of you. Let's talk about the assessment of the damages. As you said, that we have to be very much careful about the downstream, particularly the south, when we talk about the Sindh province. When United Nations Secretary General was here on his visit to the flood affected areas in Sindh province, there was a detailed and a comprehensive briefing given by the Sindh Chief Minister Saeed Ali Shah. So the assessment which was given by the Chief Minister was around $16 billion for the province of Sindh only. So when you mentioned that very important point, that South is going to be more vulnerable in days to come, so definitely that amount is going to increase manifold.
Yes, obviously. You cannot assess right now exactly, because water is coming. Water is coming from all the, from all the rivers, from all the streams, from all the, snow. Every water converge in the Sindh. And the second important point is, if you look at the terrain of the Sindh, it's a flat terrain. The closer you to the water when water get closer to the Arabian Sea or the base level, the terrain is flat. So water will move, velocity is very low and it can move diagonally. So you cannot exactly assess what the damages it causes. So for my feeling is, just like Dr. Ameer, the damages could be more than 40 billion at this time, and it will increase with the passage of time. So I mean, international community as well as our local community, they need to formulate the clear policies of management. It's because it's not over. It's not going to become, it's not becoming over in a very short, in a near future. It will continue for a month or so.
Your point is well taken. So, Dr. Pervaiz, when we talk about the responsibility of international community, we see there were a number of initiatives which were taken from the platform of the United Nations. We talk about the Kyoto Protocol, and there is a certain conference that is held every 5 years. It publishes its findings as well. And then we saw the Paris Climate Agreement as well. We saw a couple of big powers pulling out of that Paris Climate Agreement as well. So when they're not ready to cooperate with the rest of the world, when it comes to agreeing with those protocols, do you think they would have the realization that they would come in order to do justice with countries like Pakistan in form of reparations and paying them to the countries like Pakistan as we have been affected?
I seriously doubt that. I've been part of the COP negotiations starting from 2015, which is COP 15, and went in for about 6. I helped Pakistan negotiate the adaptation track. The mood generally is that we have developed you can find your own path of developing. We will not sacrifice our growth rate. That was the basic argument of Mr. Donald Trump, and that was the main reason of pulling out. That we don't want to forego our emissions on coal and some of these other areas. We don't want to go for that. And then they developed a category which is called particularly vulnerable countries. Pakistan was, I also participated in initiating that track. We were kicked out because they were thought that we are not LDC. We are a country which is, our per capita GDP was higher than 1,000 or 1,200. Bangladesh and others argued that, well, it's not really a developing country. I mean, they should not be even sitting on this forum. So the hope over there and making too much expectations, I think that's a little far-fetched. Yes, what is possible is responsibility. It's justice and responsibility. It can be done in different ways. Number one, my strong feeling is you go back to the donors, you go back to the World Bank, you go back to IMF. Look, this situation is something which we never created. It's created by the West. You are the institutions which are basically being managed by the West. Give us a write-off on most of our loans. We have been very unfairly treated. Give us a give us a lean period. Give us some time to pay for it. Even if we have some debts over there, give us time. There are projects like Sindh is being overtaken by projects which are the follies of the World Bank and some of the other institutions. This is time to come up and own up to that responsibility. RBOD, LBOD, these are two projects which are failure projects. Pakistan never signed off on them. We were forced into those two projects 20, 30 years back. That water is not going out to the sea. That sea water is coming back into Pakistan. So that is responsibility. It's not blaming. I don't want to get into a blame game. It is just coming back and saying that, okay, Pakistan was left alone. This is something which is overwhelming for Pakistan. We come here, we'll write off some loans. A lot of the bilateral loans, if countries outside want to help us, please don't give us the cash money right now. Say that, okay, you're totally screwed up anyway. We write off 60% of your loan, 80% of your loan. That also goes for our brethren.
Right. Dr. Asif, do you have anything to say regarding the waiving of the loans also?
Yeah, this is a very...
For the international powers to come for the reparations?
Yeah, that's a very good idea given by the Dr. Pervaiz Ameer. Obviously, because they are responsible, and this is very, surprising that Pakistan has been, kicked out from the, it has been included in the list of, that was not in LDC, least developed countries, it's developing. Because Pakistan is a special case because, Pakistan has been consistently ranked among the top 10th vulnerable countries. So how can you kick away Pakistan away from the, AIDS and all those things? Yes, obviously, help could be in different ways. In terms of technology transfer, in terms of education, in terms of good quality research, in terms of waiving off the loan amount, because all this is basically what all we need is help. We can do our own. We can make policies. We can we can formulate policies at our own as well. But all we need is help from international community too, because we become the victim of their ugly development. Actually, this is the main point. So it's not the matter of just simple aid or helping. It is their ethical, moral and official kind of a responsibility to help this part of a nation the way they can. This is the most important thing. And now the world have realized that after looking at the suffering of the people of this part of the nation. So there are different set of policies, like for example, in the US, they put extra amount into the research and then they publish the good quality paper in the peer reviewed journal, and then the extract of which is published in the leading newspaper like in New York Times or in Financial Times, and policies are made on those editorial. So that will help. So this is a kind of a help they can extend, like for example in terms of research, in terms of data collection, in terms of, as Dr. Ameer mentioned, in terms of waiving off the loan. There are so many ways, but obviously there is no other way out except to help this part of the nation, which is the most vulnerable. Right.
So Dr. Pervaiz, as you mentioned that Donald Trump had a very interesting sort of a reason that the pace of the economic growth of the United States will reduce, and they don't want to switch off from burning fossil fuels and coal. Do you think that is sufficient a reason to keep the economy thriving, or are the alternate resources or the renewables, as UN Secretary General has a number of times reiterated that the world should actually try to shift towards the renewables? So don't you think it takes considerable time to switch from already established protocols to the newer ones?
No, I don't think so. Germany is an example, a very clear example, moving very rapidly into solar, into some of these other renewables which you're talking about, biogas and others. So if you look at that, they're basically cutting off their total fleet. I mean, they're getting out of these vehicular emissions, which is one of the main issues, vehicular emissions. They're coming up with new airplanes which are going to be hydrogen based. They're saying that we would like, that's maybe another $20 trillion worth of investment. But their countries in Europe are showing much more responsibility. With the US, I think I'm very glad to see that with the new government with Mr. Biden, they saw that that was a stupid way to go. I mean, you don't first negotiate a treaty, you stand with it, and then you just pull out of it. The worst thing which that has done is it has taken the world 4 years behind in the required research. All funding for research was cut off. So where do you stand? America, I mean, we have a 4-year gap. I mean, we really don't, get that intellectual input which is needed to solve a lot of these problems. And I would like to say, in addition, that the solutions have to be science-based. You cannot have whim of the nation, just some people sitting here, clerical level, saying that, oh, we would like to do this. The world doesn't work that way. The science-based solutions are GIS. If I don't look at Pakistani data, I'm looking at NASA data very carefully, what's going on. That's what you need. You need Google Earth. You need people to say that, look, it's not all Pakistan, it is these hotspots. That's where my problem is. What do I want to do? You have an intellectual based proposal, which is very cogent. Just saying, oh, give us more money, then nobody's willing to buy that.
Back to this point, Dr. Pervaiz, please hold that thought. We are joined by another participant, Mr. Kamran, Yousaf, senior journalist, who has been himself to the flood affected areas for covering the kind of hardships and the difficulties the flooded people are facing in the relief and the rescue work which is being carried out by the authorities. Mr. Yousaf, thank you very much for joining in. So would you like to share with our viewers what those particular areas were where you've been in order to cover the devastation caused by the floods?
Well, I visited 3 districts of Sindh province, Sakhar, Khairpur and Kambar Shadat Kot, and of course that other adjoining areas. And my first impression was that the devastation was absolutely staggering. In one district in Kambar Shadat Kot, when I was traveling, I traveled about 150 kilometers. It was like that you were traveling in the middle of the ocean. There was only road. That was a dry place where people could find shelter. Rest of it, all water. It was like that a big ocean. And the situation was absolutely precarious over there. And even I was not expecting when I was traveling that the situation would be that bad. And people were really telling that even in their entire lives, they had never seen such kind of unprecedented torrential rains, and that caused a massive, massive devastation and destruction there. People have not just lost their homes, they have also lost their livelihoods. Remember that Khairpur is one district that produces 80% of Pakistan's dates. And I've seen that, the date palm trees were underwater. There was a damage to the crop. And then you going further towards the south in Kambar Shadat Kot, you could see even rice fields underwater. So the devastation is unimaginable. You can't put it in words.
So, Mr. Yousaf, when you say that while moving down in the south in Sindh province and the areas that you visited personally, it seemed like you're moving in the middle of a big ocean. It would definitely be quite a difficult time for the natives over there. What is the condition right now with those people? Are all those people who are stranded because these massive waters coming to destroy their homes and catapulting their entire lives and livelihoods as well? Or are all those people being safely transferred to the relief camps?
Well, I think except Dadu and Jamshoro district, where they are still in danger of being more flooded because of the overflowing Manchar Lake. Rest of the areas, at least water is, receding, but very slightly. Because the devastation is so huge, most of the people that I witnessed took shelter on the roadside. And what I saw that there were little presence of the local or other authorities, at least the places that I visited. People really complained the kind of help that they were looking for have not yet arrived. They put together whatever, they had, pieces of cloth or whatever sheets that they available. They were trying to, find shelter under that. And also remember that after several days and weeks of unprecedented rains, now the weather in Sindh province is extremely hot. The temperatures are absolutely unbearable. And the other problem that the people over there are facing, let alone forget about, the food, they have no or little access to the clean drinking water. And because of lack of access to the clean drinking water, there have been many cases of waterborne diseases. At least in one camp that I visited in Khairpur, a little girl also passed away because her parents say that they did not have the food or, the water to provide, and also they did not have the basic healthcare facilities. So the situation over there is certainly, very painful for those people.
Indeed, Mr. Yousaf, we know that the scale and the proportion of the destruction and the devastation caused by these floods is huge, beyond our imaginations. They've actually rattled all the natives in the southern province of Sindh to the core. Now the government is leading from the front in order to provide relief and rescue to these people, especially when we talk about there was an announcement by Prime Minister regarding the cash assistance program, 25,000 rupees per affected family. That's being dispersed through a Benazir income support program. Have you witnessed this thing happening? Because I myself have been to Dera Ismail Khan. I myself witnessed that the government employees are working day in and day out to give that cash assistance to the flood affected people.
Well, the areas that I have visited, certainly, that the people that I have spoken to, they were really complaining that they have not yet been provided the kind of assistance that you were telling. They were also not provided what I witnessed, even, the tents. Whatever they were taking shelter, they, just, do it their own. There were certain flood relief camps in Sakhar and in certain other areas. But of course that if you go to the rural areas, there is the real challenge. And certainly the government obviously is taking all the steps that they are saying that they can. And also other local NGOs and charity organizations are also assisting, and international aid is also arriving. But what I noticed that aid is not reaching to all the people, particularly in the rural areas. They desperately need, assistance. At least, let me give you an example that I traveled at least 200 kilometers from Sakhar to Shadat Kot, and in that area, what I saw only one flood relief camp set up by the Provincial Disaster Management Authority. Other than that, I did not at least see any government presence, no local MNA, no local MPA, no minister, at least the areas that I visited.
Right.
So it will be injustice if I just simply say that the government is doing
Mr. Kamran,
tremendous job.
The areas that you've just mentioned, of course, the scale is huge. Of course, the government and the authorities are trying to reach out to every single person who's been affected, the families who've been affected by these floods. And since there was water everywhere, especially when we talk about Sindh province, there would definitely be lesser dry ground for establishing the relief camps over there as well. But the government and the authorities, including the armed forces, are also working day in and day out to reach out to all those people and provide them relief. Thank you very much for being with us on a show today, Mr. Kamran Yousaf, senior journalist. We really appreciate your time here on the show. So, Dr. Pervaiz, coming back to that very point, when we You mentioned an interesting point that we lost a phenomenal amount of water.
That continue to do so. Yeah.
Would continue to do so. So don't you think that we should actually think about increasing our water storage capacity also, and how could that be done?
I think that should be priority number one. If you can get some money, hopefully you will. If you make it transparent, we have to start looking at some additional structures. They don't all have to be dams. The moment we talk about structure, the thing which comes to your mind is that there can be 5 types of interventions you can look at. The first intervention is adding new barrages. If we had a barrage at 7, I appraised and looked at that situation. If we had a barrage at 7, which could have been done in 3 years, this situation would not simply develop. A great extent, it would be mitigated. Same goes for the reach between Khattak as well as downstream. On all 5 rivers, start putting in barrages wherever you can. That's the first thing you can do. You require a structure below Khattak, wherever you want to make it, whether it's at Kalabagh, Pila, whichever, I don't know, sometimes you get into controversies, I don't know. Unless and until you have that structure, you're not going to be able to provide that space of 8 million acre feet of water. If I can store 8 million acre feet of water over there, Riverian floods are history. They will simply not happen. I can still take care of some of the overwhelming rainfall, provided I invest in drainage. There my problem is, I've not invested in drainage. This one, what is it's created 100, I think it's miles or kilometers worth of a lake. If you look at the area which they were just talking, look at GIS imagery from NASA. Very clearly and that's where most of that destruction is taking place. If you could hold back that water, the 7 million acre feet water which went from this Kabul and Swat River and partly from the Indus above Tarbela, that's the water which starts, you have to hold it back. When you get into this situation, you have to have places where you hold back that water. Then it's putting the water in through 100,000 or maybe even 500,000 dug wells. You can always store water in areas which are underground. The only problem with that is you can store that water, but when you pull it out, it's very costly, and there's a cost to pulling it out. The third thing, which is extremely important, is diverting these waters to our deserts. Unless and until you do that, you divert it, that's where the economic value comes back to Pakistan. If you divert it to Cholistan, you divert it to Tharparkar, you divert it to Thal. In Balochistan, you divert it and save it in the Dasht area, which is on the bordering with Gwadar and these, you can store it over there. That's the logical response. Anybody you take this proposal to the international community, they will ask, all right, we're going to give money. Where is that money going to be spent? I don't want to give you money for relief. You should be able to take care of that. Countries face this type of problem. There are 20 which are going through flooding situation. I don't want to give you for rescue. You're already doing a reasonable job. What you have done is you're putting the political economy all into one province. You're forgetting about what is happening in Swat. You're forgetting what's happening in Abbottabad. You're forgetting what is happening to the area you visit, DI Khan. It's not going to be in the, it's just because we have one hotspot, we don't want to put all our eggs into that hotspot. We want a sustainable long-term solution. In my humble opinion, the first solution which you require is a solution which is going to capture those additional flows which are coming from glacier melt. Mark my words, every 3rd to 5th year, Pakistan will face this similar situation. Whenever you have temperature rises, somebody is saying that temperatures are rising. What does that mean? When temperatures rise, it's going to be pushed back with much more rain. Here you're going to get melting glaciers. You're going to get, these glaciers are going to come down falling like, balls out of hell. You put up a structure over there, you have 8 sites which have already been approved in 1960. Go get back. When you give a proposal, do an intellectual proposal, not a begging bowl that, oh, give us money, it's very important, we are suffering. No, give an intellectual proposal, convince the people who are the financiers that we need to solve 3 things in one go. We need to solve our flooding problem, we need to solve our energy problem, we need to solve above all our economic problem. The things which are coming for you in the next 2 months, number 1 is extreme damages from disease. You're only talking about the infrastructure, extreme damages from disease. Number 2 is a food insecurity situation which is going to plummet into anything. You're already 7 million tons of wheat in shortage. You talk about a 30%, 35% reduction in total wheat production. One of the prime ministers was saying, the ex-prime minister, oh, that floods will be good, we'll be able to plant wheat. Nonsense, bungo. You don't do that.
So, sir, when we talk about, there are certain solutions that you've already mentioned, that in terms of building better infrastructure, it includes barrages and digging the wells to store water underground as well, and then diverting it towards the desert. So what are the other two that?
I think that then comes basically what governance. Governance is equally important. Why do people get killed? Because they're in harm's way. You have to start putting strategies of water rights and property rights.
That's very important. So, Dr. Asif, what's your take? Do you think these solutions which Dr. Pervaiz has just mentioned are viable? And it actually calls for a huge amount of money to create such an infrastructure, either building new barrages or digging the wells for the underground storage or diverting that overflowing water towards the deserts.
Just to add on, in addition to barrages, water conservation structures, we also need to manage our available water. Our irrigation efficiency is very low. We are wasting 60% of water just on application. We have application losses more than 60%. We have around 35% conveyance losses. So we need to improve our already existing infrastructure of irrigation canals, water courses, just like lining of water courses. We need to go for a high efficiency irrigation system like sprinkler irrigation system and drip irrigation system. I personally have grown the rice with the sprinkler irrigation system just to save the amount of water. Why? Because this is very important, because Dr. Ameer was really concerned about water just like me, because I value water more than anything else. When I was talking to one of the Canadian channel, and I said, when we are growing rice with groundwater, so we are not actually selling our rice, we are selling our water, because water is more valuable. Before partition, or at the time of partition, per capita availability of water in Pakistan was 5,300 cubic meter per person per year, which has now declined to less than 1,000 cubic meter per person per year. So you can see the decline in water shortages. And what we have, what type of structures we have right now to conserve water or to control the floods? All we have is only 2 dams, Tarbela and Mangla. And there are the divergent structures, small divergent structures, you can say like that, barrages, something like that. So we have not been able to make the dams and all those things. So what will happen after the flood will gone? We will face the clear spell of a drought in the coming months. Obviously, we will have a dry spell, and people will again crying. And as Dr. Ameer mentioned, the flood situation is not over. We will face food crisis after that and health crisis, obviously. So we have to, damage will be more than our expectations. So obviously we need to put clear science. A solution should be clearly science based, rather than by discussions with some people, or some people suggest. And obviously donor will not give you money just only for aid. And just me to reiterate, and just me say again, we are very good at rescue and rehabilitation, but we are not good in the long-term management, and world is looking at the long-term management. Dr. Ameer gave a very good suggestion that we need to spend the money on the infrastructures like barrages, dams, or diverting the water.
So Dr. Asif, for that there should be pertinent and precise input by the scientific community, at least from Pakistan. It happens to be the responsibility of the scientific community and the scholars and the researchers as well, because they have to come and the government and the authorities have to come in unison in order to implement such type of ideas.
What is the dilemma of Pakistan, Javed? Yes, definitely after this flood, many scholars, many scientists will collect the data, and they will do the field work, they will collect the real-time data and will publish the paper, and that paper will be online in a very good journal. But after that, everything will be gone. That paper will just used as a citation.
Is that publishing going on for the sake of publishing only, or only to get credibility as a scholar? Because why the scientific community in Pakistan, the scholars, don't go and have that access to the government authorities and impress upon the authorities that, look, these are the solutions. The unusual times require unusual responses.
Government has its own priorities. Secondly, there is a clear gap. There is a clear gap between the industry and scientific community and the government. The data is not rationalized. We need to establish a strong linkage between academia, between the research institution, government and non-government organization, so that they can work collectively, so that end product could reach the end user. That's the most important, which is slightly missing in this country.
So Dr. Pervaiz, your take on this?
My take is simple.
That scientific community has that responsibility also.
The intellectual part is already there.
Yes.
2005, we put up one of the major reports. I'm one of the authors on it. World Bank, it has been reviewed worldwide. The recipe, Musharraf came out and Musharraf started waving it, look, I have the Bible for water. Bibles are there, the consulting reports are there. Harvard University put up in 1960s a master plan. The intellectual part is there. The scientific community does, yes, a scientist basically does a paper for that his own
for the sake of publishing.
He does that. Your problem is not at the scientific community level. Your problem is at the level of interpretation and receipt. If I have a
but my question remains to be if there is a little bit of lack of understanding when it comes to the authorities, whose responsibility it happens to be to make them understand that these are the viable solutions and these could be implemented in such and such ways. I mean, when you already at the start of the program, you also said when we talk about the responsibility of the international community, they should also give us research, they should also do the climatic modeling for Pakistan. Why can't Pakistani scientists do it? Isn't it the responsibility of the universities over here, the academia, the institutions, in order to move forward with the research and development and then take the government and the authorities on board and give them some sort of viable solution so that the government could go with a strong case in front of the international community?
You have a water
with
policy,
a strong backup of the scientific
knowledge. You have a water policy, you have a climate change policy, you have an environment policy, you have umpteen number of policies with you. You have a whole set of cadre of, I know some of the best scientists in the world which are basically from Pakistan. In 2018, we brought 700 people from abroad in this Supreme Court, which is just in front of you. That Supreme Court listened to 5 justices present in the past and the ones who are going to be in the future. They listened to these arguments which we are making right now here. We pleaded for action. We pleaded for action. We told them this is the way forward. The world's topmost expertise says for Pakistan, this is the way forward. We know the way forward. Our problem is the ability to receive, decipher information. That is totally absent. How can you do PhD level research?
Unfortunately, we are short of time. There can be a lot of discussion on this particular thing. Dr. Asif, your last points, anything you want to
My point is, we are in trouble right now. So the immediate, our responsibility is rehabilitation and rescue, and after that long-term management, because the poorest, the poor people have suffered a lot during this crisis. So long-term rehabilitation is our topmost priority. Either we are scientists, either we are policymakers, we are government officials, because you see in these floods, lot of damages, lot of land has been eroded, their farms, their cattle have been eroded, and obviously their livelihood are at stake even when this crisis is over. So our prime responsibility is to help this.
Right, Dr. Pervaiz, Ameer, flood expert, thank you very much for being in the studio. And Dr. Asif Javed, environmental scientist, thank you very much for your time, for being in the studio as well. So when we talk about the scale and the proportion of the damages by the recent floods, it also not only at the same time, it calls for the international community's support, but also it calls for that responsible management of the water and the water resources, and going for those viable solutions the scientific community over here in Pakistan has to suggest to the authorities. With that note, we come to the end of today's show. Until the next one, take very good care of yourselves.